Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our afternoon Yes Speaker series, talk featuring Sarah Domenico, who will share a talk on character and authenticity. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Anna Rita Mores, and I'm the chair at the School of Design at George Brown College. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which George Brown College is situated is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation and other Indigenous peoples who have lived on this land. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. Across the School of Design, we remain committed to identifying and removing systemic barriers to accessing college programs and services, and are committed to identifying strategies, tools, and actions to better support our Indigenous student population. In a commitment to build connections and opportunities for students to engage with design's visionaries, YES features a week-long lecture series, 18 to be exact. The design-focused speaker series has been cultivated in an effort to provide dynamic perspectives and unique discussion opportunities for members of our community, including students and faculty alike. Honest advice for designers from really good designers connects the School of Design with those who have impacted the industry on a local and global scale through a focused thematic-based lecture. This is followed by an opportunity for conversation and dialogue using the YouTube chat. Please feel free to relay all of your questions for Sarah there. With that, I'm proud to introduce Sarah Domenico, who's the co-founder and creative director of Wedge, the independent office of brand based in Montreal and working worldwide. Wedge engages a limited roster of progressive clients each year, from iconic names to Indigo and Essence, to new visionaries launching the next great thing. Wedge is also the official brand partner of the nonprofit organization Gender Creative Kids Canada. Sarah is a new generation leader who firmly believes in two key components to landing authentic brand signatures people love: the head and the heart. Strategic clarity guided by true cultural insights, and striking beauty that emotionally bonds. For her, design is an expression of truth. What you stand for, unleashed to max volume for your tribe. Sarah is a first-generation Canadian and a globally award-winning creative across Cannes, D&D, Tokyo TDC, Communication Arts, and others. She entered the industry as a copywriter, and so storytelling roots run deep. Sarah has worked on inspiring campaigns for IKEA, Volkswagen, The North Face, HBO, and more. She finds her greatest inspiration in nature, with space and peace to think, to dream. She's an advocate for less and better, nurturing curiosity, staying true to an outlier perspective, cherishing the environment through intentional choices, and people over profit every damn time. We have a series of giveaways as part of YES, and we're giving out a copy of Visionaries Packaged for Life, Beer, Wine, and Spirits, where Sarah and Wedge's work is featured. The publication is being given out to one of our students who RSVP'd for today's event, Katie Doyle. Katie, please DM us on Instagram to claim your prize. Moderating the Q&A portion of today's session is graphic design graduate Taylor Simnell. Taylor is passionate about branding and packaging. For her thesis project, she created a nonprofit merchandise brand called Kind Crowd, which is centered on helping our local restaurants recover from the effects of the pandemic. Outside of school, she runs a small art print business called Lucky Panther, which is focused on American traditional tattoo illustrations. Welcome, Taylor. With that, I am pleased to turn over to Sarah, who will get us started with her presentation.
All right, it's my turn, I suppose. Is my screen, everyone can see it? We're good to go? Okay, well, thank you, Rita, for that amazing introduction. It's always great to, sit and just hear someone talk about you. Doesn't feel awkward at all, so that's amazing. And I really wish I could see all of your faces and we could be in the same space together, but I just wanted to take a moment and say it's so nice to have these moments together, and really feel free to ask me anything. That's why we're here, and I'm really looking forward to that moment together. And as Rita mentioned, today we're going to talk a little bit about character, which is a huge driving force and inspiration of our studio. And I'm live from Montreal today. So this is our little icon of the city. So hello to all of you wherever you are. We're based in Montreal. We work with clients all over the world, and there's three main components that drive the heart of our practice, which is the search for distinct character, which I'm going to talk about today, inspiring narrative in everything we do and attacking everything with a progressive spirit that always pushes for more, whether that's a higher consciousness to who's being represented, forward facing in brand, or who's behind them actually doing the work and bringing those stories to life. So you've already might have seen some of our work. Maybe you haven't, and Wedge is totally new to you. But we work a lot in brand, and that could be, bringing new products to market, bringing them to life. It could also be helping some brands like rediscover who they are and express their voice and express their values. So these are some of our projects, and I invite you all to learn more about us on wedge.org. People often ask us, how do you arrive at the projects or results or solutions that you arrive to? And we have a specific way of working that we like to call the Wedge way. And we call it cultural foraging. So, no matter what you work on, it could be, I don't know, an ice cream packaging, a beauty brand, a car brand, whatever it is, we really like to forage inside the category, but then also look way beyond it to see what other inspirations can emerge. So it's this cross-pollination that we find really interesting. It could be world of design, world of art, of architecture, of fashion, of everyday life that really allow the unexpected to happen when we take like seemingly disconnected inspirations and bring them together. So for us, that's something we really encourage on our design team is don't just look at the vacuum of how something might be defined today or how a category might be defined today, because every category has an archetype. So be mindful of the archetype, but see what else we can draw from to create, something special. I saw this quote the other day by one of my favorites, Brian Collins. You may or may not know who he is, but he's the founder of Collins based in New York City. And he said, the opposite of courage is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity. And I think this is so true. I think in design, we really have to be willing to take a chance on something different, to push for what something can be. We always hear the same expression of like, disrupt the status quo and all of these things. I don't know if disruption is good. I think it's really important to be aware of what's around, but I think we need to be brave enough to present something a little bit different, sort of shift the way of seeing. And I do believe that design has the power to really do that. And that's what really drives me and my team and the greatest inspiration for our work. So today, distinct character. I love Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I grew up with Mr. Rogers. I'm aging myself by sharing this with you, but I think it's really important to remind yourself that you're the only one who can be you. And that's really cheesy, but it's the same goes toward brand and design and communication. So we can be another one. We can be another archetype of something that we know really well. But I think it's important to remember that with every brief that comes by, we have the opportunity to be the one and to stand for something really different. And when we think of defining our character, it's about unearthing those insights and going deep to dig those truths about ourselves that we can unearth, whether it's about a service or about a product. And when we do that, we're able to surpass, something that might feel like a trend of the moment, and, really push for something a little bit long lasting. Character is also related to authenticity, and authenticity over aesthetics. Again, you can see it swings back to truth and trend, but when we're able to dig in the real and get a little bit deeper, we also have the opportunity to not solve something by, merely making it beautiful, and beauty is a huge part of it, but doing something that really is honest to us. And when I say the brand, when I say us, I mean the brand or the product and service that we're designing for. So you might be asking yourselves, okay, cool, great to know, but how do I get there? How do I find those truths? How do I find those components that are really authentic? And I think character always swings back to expressing your values, taking a step back and say, okay, what are the 5 or 6 or even 4 things that really guide the reason why this thing exists or what we're trying to communicate outward. And so I'm going to share some of our projects and kind of peel back the layers a bit and show you what characters lie beneath them. Vacation Leisure Enhancing Sunscreen is a new project that we launched recently. It's based out of Miami. This was one of our first pandemic clients, which like no one really likes that title, but that's the reality of what we're in. Okay, cool. And some of the values that lie behind Vacation of when we first met them was this huge, and I mean, it's no surprise, but this huge connection of this desire for nostalgia rooted back into like 1986, when probably not many of you were like born at that time. But anyway, that's okay. Taking our leisure very seriously fun expression. It was this like Club Med Miami vibe, the idea of like you pull out, you're in your grandma's cabinet and you find this bottle of sunscreen like from way back in the day that was so present, like in the spirit of the founders and the people around the table of Vacation before we even started designing everything. So these were the values that acted as the lighthouse to really land on the solution that you see in front of us now. It's this, informational system that uses this Garamond, which reminds us of back in the day. It's like packed of so many words and copy, and the yellow was really connected to the sun, and the blue was really connected to the water because hello, summer and beach. And for the design system of the advertising, we were really inspired by 1980s or 1990s lockups where you always have that charming copywriting, and everything is really characterful. Another big project that sort of, I guess, was our breakthrough was Drav Beer. And the codes behind this one was definitely a sense of utility. So think functional information systems. It was this tension between, cool but classic, youthful, but the desire to do something very iconic, and always keeping in mind that there was a very accessible price point for our consumer. And so I remember, if you think of the craft brewery language, there was a lot of illustration in the category, a lot of complexity there, things that felt really, really craft. So for us, we were like, okay, well, we can be mindful of these codes, but we can break through in our own way by doing something very graphic. And we actually studied a lot of codes from vintage packaging from back in the day, where it was always a few key components, where it was, color, strong sense of shape and iconography, and really bringing those ingredients to life to create something special. And I want to say, like, color is often something that is, how do I say, has strong immediate associations. And I think for us, it was important that when we were creating a beer for everyone, that the color could also belong to everyone. So, throwing a pink can in the mix was also a part of that, which in the land of beer, which tends to be traditionally masculine, I mean, for these progressive founders, it wasn't even a conversation. So I think even in your design choices, we can begin to implement little changes even within a category to help people see a little bit differently and embrace things as they should be embraced. And another fun story about Drav behind the scenes is that, the design director on this project, Justin Lordy, he was like, we have to do something as iconic as Duff Beer from The Simpsons. It's that thing that's unmistakable that you always see. And I love that that's a reference or a driving inspiration, and just a nice benchmark to hit. It's packaging has this wonderful way of, living with us, integrating into our lives, sort of hanging around. And I think we need to remind ourselves of the emotional component of that. So Drav really finds its character in this cool but classic, really authentic, perspective for what a new modern beer company can be. Another great component of, landing on distinct character is empathy. And active listening to gain understanding versus making assumptions about a group of people, making assumptions about a category, and again, like we tend to live in archetypes. We tend to say beauty and think of one thing. We tend to say a car industry and think of things as supercharged. In fact, we tend to think of sports categories in certain ways. And I think part of design is also breaking our ways of thinking, being mindful of the archetypes that exist, but pushing past them. And especially when you're designing for, I want to say, human-driven organizations, it's so important to understand before we make any assumptions. And this was, the position that we found ourselves in when we were working with Gender Creative Kids Canada. They're a nonprofit, community-driven organization that really fight for the rights of kids who express themselves like beyond the gender binary. They provide support to their parents, and they came to us to, I want to say, officialize their brand identity and sort of add some dignity to their visual expression, to be taken seriously when they, challenge laws, or even provide a lot of care and comfort and, I would say, confidence and trust for parents and kids that approach the organization, which, in some circumstances, taking that first step could be really scary. And so when we joined with them, our entire design team participated in a workshop together where we listened and we learned, and it directly inspired the design. And when we were listening to the stories of a lot of the trans or non-binary youth around us, or, everyone from teenagers to a 65-year-old woman sharing their journey with me, there was one thing that kept coming back in the conversations, which was the truest part of you rests in your heart. It's a knowingness inside of us. We feel it. That's who we are. And that's what we're trying to express to the world. And we kept hearing that over and over and over and over again in conversation, that when we came to, at the moment of designing the identity and creating this symbol, we knew that the heart needed to be a part of it. And so we decided to create this like very friendly character to make it very comforting to the kids, something that could, wasn't too childish for like, cool teenagers here and all that stuff, but provided a lot of, like hope and just this feeling like you can approach the organization without judgment. And the character is standing on two really strong legs, up tall, always moving forward in a progressive direction. And so it's all of these little insights that we pulled out of our work together that really inspired the work that we did with the organization. And I think as designers, it's, it's our part of our duty to be curious, part of our duty to approach with a sense of empathy and compassion, and really learn from the other people around the table and allow those learnings to inform that the work that we do for them. Another big component of hitting our character is dig. We like to say dig for cultural tension to hit the real. And you're like, okay, what does this mean? Well, this means like look around at life and how we're living today, and what are the challenges that we face, what are the feelings that we're all collectively feeling, and allow that to percolate the work. And we rebranded the Canadian furniture company EQ3, and we helped them launch their store in New York City. And they came to us, this is when they came to us, and their problem was, we just don't know what we stand for anymore. We've been in business for a really long time. There's a lot of category competition, and we sort of just lost our way. So yes, part of the change was also aesthetic, but it was it was far deeper than that, to say, again, what do we stand for? What is our true narrative and our authenticity? And so a lot of the times when we hear that word authenticity, you have a choice. You can manufacture it or you can do it for real. And we prefer, option 2 on that one. And so, being a Canadian company, being in furniture, there was a lot of discussion around like modern living, a lot of discussion on space. Being in Canada, we have vast space, a huge amount of space around us. And when we think of what we're facing in this modern life and space, what is taking up the most space in our reality? Well, it's this guy right here. We're committing so much of our time and space to, and our attention to, being on social media, being online, giving it to our, phones. And I don't know about you, but when I get my weekly time report, it's a little triggering, right? So what we landed on, the insight there was that space in this modern life is a true luxury. And space is also necessary for human fulfillment. I mean, mental space, physical space, spiritual space, all of these different components. And when we landed on these insights, it became hugely inspiring to our team as a way to guide the design process. And I'm going to share with you a little manifesto that we wrote for them that always remained behind the scenes, but it was the thing that really anchored and set the pace for the design work to come. So in a world that never stops, let's all take a deep breath. Reclaim space for peace, to think, to dream, to scream. Enter space with positivity, open space for ingenuity, invite space to personality, voices, and choices, because space is designed to share. Seize the space to explore out wide or to focus up close. Commit space to friendship, to tenderness, to love. Respect the space around you. Give space to things that grow with you, year after year after year. No matter where you go, see how space reminds you there really is no place like home. In a world that never stops, EQ3 welcomes the space for life to take shape. So suddenly we found ourselves tapping into this greater meaning of what the company could stand for. And when we even dug into their name, EQ3 as an acronym stands for Emotional Quotient in the Third Dimension. I mean, intergalactica, like that sounds really intellectual, right? But what it really means when you break it down, emotional quotient in the third dimension, how do you feel in your space? So again, as I mentioned, this nugget, this insight that we untapped of space became the fuel of inspiration. And it really drove everything from ad campaigns, like this was one of the lines from when we launched them in New York City. Consider mental space more valuable than square footage. When you think of New York, you think of people on top of people on top of people, smaller spaces, super expensive. And here, we're just challenging, what is truly important in life. And then when we think of the design system, because you're probably thinking, okay, that's amazing, get to the design part of it. We visited their stores and we did a lot of research in retail because, that's the heart of where the consumer interacts with the brand. And so what we really noticed was that even in the store, there was this huge sense of space. The ceilings were always tall. It was always very, white and light and bright and airy. And so space became a key component within the design toolbox. And so when we were composing all of our layouts, it was a key ingredient that always had to be considered, just like a color, just like a hierarchy. So whether it's, for a pamphlet, for a product, or, tags to stitch onto pillows, or it was, editorial designs, it was always that component of space that had to be integrated as part of their distinct visual signature. And it's all of these little choices that really combine to create, the unique visual character of a brand or of a product. Another way of untapping character is also to look at what's present, look inside, look at what's around right in front of you. And in the case of EQ3 being, based in Winnipeg in Manitoba, we looked around at the landscape. We looked at the sun, we looked at the prairie, we look at the wheat, we look at, the prairie crocus, which is their national flower. We looked everywhere to create this beautiful color palette that was so authentic and true to them and rooted in their home, Winnipeg, Manitoba. And then, that color came to life, in promotions and big events when we wanted to just, add that breath of fresh air. But I love this little insight that really roots back to their authentic spirit and the little truths along the way to create something very special. And while we might look around, sometimes we're also in the position to look at the past. Sometimes we have this tendency of like the brief lands on our desk and we're like, okay, let's do something completely new that the world has never seen before. Like that's a lot of pressure. And sometimes the answers are already present. They just need to be uprooted. And this is typical in the case of a rebrand. Getting to know a company's history, getting to know the history of the product, like there might be something juicy that's really there. And we are working with Black's photography, and you're probably like, who is this? And great question, because I mean, back in the day, this was the place that everyone went to get their film developed. Back when that was a thing and technology wasn't as far along. But Black's was the store that was in everyone's, mall, like everyone's family would go there to develop their pictures. And when we started working with them, we said, okay, like I want to see your advertising history from the very beginning. And this was one of their early print ads. And we were like, oh my gosh, like this is so full of character. It's beautiful, the typography, the charming illustration. And, when we landed on these ads that were, again, from the 80s and 90s, and we saw this logo, we were like, oh my God, like this needs to come back to life in a very profound way. And so sometimes the answer rests not in, something we haven't seen before, but it's something that we have seen. And so we took that logo and we slightly modified it, to bring their true spirit back to life in the work that we're doing forward, and bring some of that charm back, and, bring some of the color back. That's really inspired by, living and celebrating a life in every single hue. And so some of the values that rest behind Blacks became, Technicolor, a spirit or emotion that felt joyful and alive, a sense of clarity, a fun authority, and a boldness that's present in every interaction. And so, even when we go online, like the digital experience could embody, a lot of color. We're using exclamation marks as part of that charming language from back in the day that we wanted to bring back. Even printed materials, make you feel alive and joyful when you open, your printed materials back up again and you relive all of those memories. And so I think, with any brief or project that lands on your desk, we must find a way to connect every project with a sense of truth. It's something greater, an insight that's buried, whether it's, in a company's history, whether it's, present within the people around the table, whether it's inspired by, our cultural reality, like a collective human insight that we're all sharing at the moment. And if you ever get stuck, it's so important to remind ourselves of that magic that we felt, of that aha, of that greater thing that really landed us towards this solution. That's where it all comes alive. And what I always like to remind ourselves of too is that I use this kimchi metaphor a lot, but bear with me. I'm like, we're kimchi. You're kimchi. You're like, what are you talking about? I'm kimchi. Fermentation. Great things take time. And when I put myself back in the position, that you're in right now, it's so beautiful because it's the beginning. It's the beginning of everything. And you might feel this pressure, to be like, straight out of the gate, I need to be the one to get the great internship or land the perfect project or put everything together so perfectly. But this idea of perfection is so false. And it's like, you're just starting. So a lot of the references that we look at and love, behind them is so much time, and it's also a team. So I think it's important to remember to give yourself the space and time to become the most amazing kimchi anyone has ever had. I hope that metaphor made sense, but I think it's a really good reminder, this time component that we often forget. And in that journey to be very, very curious, and within that journey to remember that that is how we as designers and creative people develop our intuition. And over time, you'll be able to feel it. And I have no proof of that. I only have my word for you to believe in, but it really is true. And your intuitive force that you develop over time is one of the greatest components. So yeah, there's no rush to the finish line. There's no rush to win the award or the latest and greatest. It's about, nurturing your intuition. Just nurturing the journey. Because I saw this ring the other day, and again, this is a part of it, cultural foraging all the time, picking seamlessly disconnected inspirations, but little do you know, they'll end up in like a presentation deck to a bunch of like amazing young students. But I really do believe in that time factor, getting to know yourself, giving yourself the space as a designer to develop, because you form that character as a design as well. And everyone will have that that superpower, that little spice, your point of view, your perspective that you can contribute, to bringing a project to life. And don't hold back, because that element of who you are is unique around the table. And I think that's something to not be taken for granted, and to remind yourself to, there is a reason why you're there. There is a reason why you've been given the opportunity. There's a reason why you're around the table. So because you are the only one who can be you, just like all these brands and things and projects we've been talking about. But, I think it's just really important to develop and stay true to our character along the journey. Okay, I'm done. Taylor? Taylor, come back.
Well, thank you for that talk. Round of applause. I'm sure we're getting virtual claps. That was an incredible talk, very insightful. I really loved the kimchi metaphor, because I think that's something I'm definitely feeling, and I'm sure a lot of my fellow grads are feeling right now. Thank you.
Yeah, kimchi. I was like, you know what? I was watching a documentary. I think it was an episode of Chef's Table, and they featured a monk in a monastery. And they were talking about fermentation, and they spent a lot of time talking about time as a necessary component and ingredient for growth and reaching amazing things in life in general. And I was like, man, if only I knew that when I was younger, it would have changed the game. I feel like we're just constantly putting so much pressure on ourselves to be the next latest and greatest, or have the perfect whatever. But it's like, you will meet so many people in your life too, as a designer, amazing creative directors, teammates around you. Like, you have all the time to get there, for sure. Kimchi forever.
In the topic of time, I actually have a question regarding your creative process. And when you speak on the topic of like understanding your audience and understanding your brand without assuming, I'm curious how much time of your creative process is dedicated to pure research.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, like, we never begin designing as a response to a brief. It's usually like when we start the design period, it's probably like the third phase of our projects. But I would say that having workshops with your client and the people whose problem you're trying to solve is extremely important. And how much time we give to research really depends on the scope of the project. But I would say, like, for at least there's a couple weeks before we start. And depending on the type of project, it could be, spending time to audit the brand, really ask the questions about the voice and visual components, ask the questions to understand, like, hey, how does the internal design team on the brand side use this today? What are your greatest challenges? What do you really like that works? Where do you sort of feel stuck? Where do you see yourselves growing? it's in this exchange and dialogue that I feel like a lot of the insight really comes to life. And yeah, conversation is one of the most, I think, one of the most crucial components to landing on a successful design that really feels honest to who you're working with and really feels ownable to who you're working with, because, you know, ultimately you're going to hand over this universe to someone else. You can help them bring it to life, but they're the ones who are going to, you know, take it for the long game. So when we do our research and our workshops and our conversations at the get-go, when we start, yeah, we can really set ourselves up for success for, you know, pulling all those authentic insights like into the work that we do. So how much time do we spend? I mean, depends on the yeah, it depends on the scope of work, but for sure, whether it's a big project or a small one, the workshop is always there.
So with that, I was kind of curious, like, do you need to have the full understanding of the brand's character before moving on to the design aspect? Or is there any case where you can kind of work on that simultaneously?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And sometimes it becomes unearthed throughout the process. But I would say that strategy is a really big component of the projects that we do. So already before we start designing something, we do have an idea of the values that are at play. So we might have an idea of the values that are at play as a brand or as a company, but there's a difference between those fundamental values and then, let's say, visual values. So I could say that, like, the values of my company are to be positive and progressive, but authoritarian, and I don't know, to instill confidence in my consumers. Well, visually, you can bring that to life in lots of different ways. So what we usually do at Wedge is we have a step of the process called the visual strategy, which is in a response to all of the upfront work that is done. So, you know, if I'm branding this like glass of water, I might bring it to life 3 different ways with a track that maybe one visual strategy is to be colorful. The next track is to be a little bit more subdued. The next track is to be really bold and energetic in our design system. And I think it's fun when you take those like fundamental brand pillars and you put them against, you know, different visual values to see how, you know, your work can come to life differently. That's also what helps the client land on something that feels the most honest to them, with you still trying to push the dial as the designer, giving them the confidence to be brave and to do something, you know, a little bit more special.
Do you find that, like, or if you've ever been in the situation where, because, you know, this is still design, still a profession, time is money, what really happens in the situation where you're hitting close to deadlines and there hasn't been that aha moment between the studio and the client yet? Like, what happens there?
It's interesting, and what I'm going to say is very annoying. I think that it doesn't really happen. And I think the reason why is because of the taking the time at the beginning to really get to know who you're working with, and also relying on your team. I think it's important to remember that you don't have to solve anything alone, and you have a team around you, you have a creative director around you, you have a design buddy around you to, you know, don't wait until you're too far down the road to ask for help. And just because you say, oh, I'm not cracking it, or something's confusing for me, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength to ask for help. So don't be afraid to do that. Yeah.
That's really good advice to all my fellow grads watching. So we do have a couple questions from the YouTube Live. I'm gonna read them up. So Sage says, I love the time and thought that goes into finding the core personality of a brand. What character traits hold closest in your work or in your life?
Oh, we're getting deep here on a Monday. We're tapping into the soul. I love it. I love it. Okay, what character traits do you hold closest in your working life? You know, it's like I think it's important to care, to truly care about the work that you're doing, to truly care about finding the right solution for someone. And, I remember like back in the day, bosses or creative directors that was like, Sarah, you just care too much. But I'm not sure that that's always a bad thing. I think it's that, dare to care that's when we push for something a little bit different. I think that's when we push for something truly inspiring. And I would also say that, authenticity. I think it's just what's so exciting about the time in which that you guys are graduating in is that it's just a different social time. And I think that you're no longer entering the industry where you are assigned certain work because of your gender. I think there's a lot more equal opportunity, and I think there's a lot more of those transparent conversations going on. So I think that's also really amazing. So that idea of like progressive perspective, point of view, that's something that is extremely important to me. And also for, Wedge as a company, that is a component there for the clients that we choose to engage with or not. We do a lot of packaging work. And so with a lot of our clients, we always try to push them to choose better options, biodegradable, whatever, for our planet. So I think this higher level of caring, of consciousness, of asking the right questions is, those are all, ingredients in the recipe that guide us for sure.
Guido says that was such a good presentation. Thank you. Where does the marketing of a company come into play when rebranding? I'm not very familiar with how the whole industry works.
Yes. Okay. Where does the marketing of a company come into play when rebranding? So usually it's so interesting. I think, who said this quote? It might have also been Brian Collins, who's just like incredible, but it's like, branding is making things that people inherently like, and advertising is convincing people to like you. And I think that that's such a big difference. So when you're rebranding something, it's really about setting the foundation for the long term, setting the values for the long term. This is the work that really needs to be long lasting for an organization. And usually when that's set, the marketing or advertising part of it comes after. So usually when the brand redesign work is done, you'll start, updating components of the system over time. So it's never like a switch that you flip and you're like, voila, everything's changing. And I think that's a really important component to remember as you start working in the industry. Like, you also have to be patient. It costs a lot of money to change everything overnight. But it's usually integrated like one step at a time. And sometimes, implementing a rebrand in reality can even be a multi-year process, but the advertising part of it usually comes after the rebrand.
I actually really like that other quote you said from Brian Collins, that the opposite of courage is conformity. So I want to expand on that a bit, especially in terms of finding design inspiration. Mm-hmm. Considering we have like an infinite amount of design inspiration at our fingertips now, but I find that these platforms do tend to favor trends. So do you think that there's kind of like an art behind finding design inspiration?
I don't know if there's an art behind finding design inspiration, but I think there's we are all naturally drawn to different things. Even Taylor, you and I can look at something and we can look at a painting. And for you, you might be inspired by the colors, and for me, it might be the brush strokes. I love how we can just find difference and beauty in different things depending on our perspective. And I think the danger of trends is that it reflects what the majority likes. And so when we go on these platforms like Pinterest, or when we spend too much time there, or when we spend too much time on like blogs and things like that, when, they're all just sort of pushing the same projects, I think we just have to say, hey, like, I'm going to commit space to reading books. And I'm going to commit space to like, okay, we can't go to the library anymore. But I think it's just like, I bought a book about like Oriental rugs the other day where it talks about like the meaning and the patterns and the history and that. It's just like, it's so important to break out of your own bubble. Watch documentaries that you might not watch, hear other people's perspectives, and like return to books or have conversations with a friend who like studies biology. Like you never know where inspiration can spark. And I really love going to like, I don't know if this is the right verbiage, but like cultural grocery stores, like the Italian grocery shop down my street versus like there's like a Latino specific grocery shop like in another neighborhood. I love going because we're breaking out of our North American bubble when we go into the different environments, and it's so inspiring. They're like little packaging museums, and just like stepping out of the ordinary and really, really seeking that. Sometimes I even think that like spending time in nature, going on hikes or whatever it might be, like giving your mind the space to not thinking about any of this shit actually helps you be more inspired. Let the connections be made in the background while you're focused on other things.
Yeah, totally. I really agree with looking at like other cultural references as well. I find looking at design inspiration in a different language kind of helps to focus on like the foundations of design that's there, and not so much maybe like the context of it, because you may not know what the context is.
And it's also okay to have the unpopular opinion. Just because something is published doesn't mean that it's the holy word. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's okay to not agree of, liking someone that everyone else likes. It's fine. Like, how can we push for something original? You know what I mean? So I think it's also in settings where, even in design reviews where the whole group, like, it's okay if you have an unpopular opinion, as long as it's presented, constructively or positively. I think we should never be afraid to, say what we think.
Absolutely. We have another question from the audience, from Jasmine. How do you measure the success of a brand design? Often when I do brand work, I experience self-doubt, like, is this the best solution for this brand?
Mm-hmm. How do you measure the success of a brand design? Again, like it depends. Different people have different barometers of success. Different clients will measure it differently. Different designers will measure that differently. And again, like, I think this goes back to my other response which is like, rely on your team. Like, don't design in a vacuum by yourself. And I think like the comfort or the assurance will come from, leaning on your team and reminding yourselves that like you're building a vision truly together. And I think sometimes like asking ourselves the questions like, is this the best? Is this the best answer out there possible? Will everyone like it? Like, it's a very suffocating thought. I think like, we often strive for the best, but it's not always about being the best or, trying to aim for the Everest. I think it's about like being better. Is it more inspiring? Does it feel closer to their character? Does it feel more true to who they are? Does it feel fresh? Like asking those types of questions, helps us know if we've hit it.
I think a big part of this profession is fighting imposter syndrome. So that's a big thing that we have to conquer.
And it's, Taylor, you hit it on the head. And I mean, whether you're like 22 or 65, that's something some people are dealing with forever, Yeah.
Can't wait. We have time for one more question. So I'd like to ask, what advice would you give to someone who's graduating this year and how to navigate the current landscape of design?
Yeah, I think it's like, you can truly have what you want. When you're like, if you're dedicated, you work hard, you ask the right questions to push yourself, you approach with curiosity, you ask for that feedback, but you're active in and applying it, like, don't limit yourself. Work on yourself, but also remember that most people who you look up to are one email away. You know, it's not out of reach. Send that DM. If they don't reply in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, send a follow-up. People are busy. Like, sometimes I think we make our own luck. And I'm a huge believer in that. I can't tell you how many times, like, you know, I've experienced a layoff. I'd been told that I cared too much or wasn't good enough or whatever. But then you meet, you know, someone else who like sees that fire in you. So don't give up. Everything is in reach. Work hard for it. Knock on the doors, because you would be surprised at how attainable things actually are. Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Definitely helpful. Yeah. I think like for a lot of us, we don't really think that like it is that accessible or attainable. So it's really good to hear them. Reassuring and reaffirming to hear from you.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't know who's out there if it's not presented. And like that is also very true for Wedge, you know? A lot of designers just like it pays to be proactive and putting yourself in front of someone and saying, hey, like this is who I am. And there's no risk. Like, what do you have to lose? Nothing. You'll be at the same position as you were before you sent that email, right? So send it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for this great presentation. So this is just day one of Yes. We have a whole week ahead of us. The next talk today is going to be at 3 o'clock with Gilbert Lee, who's being moderated by my friend Brendan Irving. You can register at yes.schoolofdesign.ca. Thank you again, Sarah. It was wonderful having you with us. And enjoy the rest of Yes.
Bye, everybody.